The silence that descended upon table 17 at Ethelgard, a bastion of old-world Manhattan opulence, was not the customary hush of reverence. It was a weapon, sharp and cold, wielded by a man in a suit that cost more than the car she drove. The blind woman's hands, resting on the crisp white linen, began to tremble, a seismic tremor of a spirit on the verge of collapse. Her son's voice, a low baritone dripping with the casual cruelty of immense wealth, had just delivered his ultimatum, and Elara had mere seconds to decide. Was her job, her tuition, her entire precarious future worth more than the dignity of the woman shrinking into the plush velvet chair before her? What she said next would either get her fired on the spot, a cautionary tale whispered among the staff for years, or it would ignite a fire that would illuminate the darkest corners of a forgotten world. The dining room of Ethelgard was a cathedral consecrated to the gods of gastronomy and finance. Ceilings vaulted 3 stories high, adorned with frescoes of allegorical figures feasting. A fire crackled in a marble hearth the size of a small apartment, its warmth barely touching the cool, calculated atmosphere. Waitstaff, clad in black and white, moved with the silent, practiced choreography of a royal court, their footsteps muffled by carpets woven a century ago in Persia. But at table 17, nestled in a discreet alcove overlooking the restaurant's private garden, the air crackled with a tension so thick it felt like a physical presence. Annalise Thorne, at 69, was the ghost at this feast. Her sight had been stolen not by a sudden trauma, but by the slow, insidious creep of glaucoma over the last 5 years. It had taken the world from her in shades of grey, blurring the edges of her life until all that remained were sounds, scents, and memories. She wore a simple but exquisitely tailored silk dress in a shade of deep sapphire, a colour her son had assured her was appropriate. Her silver hair was coiffed in a classic chignon, a style she maintained by touch and memory, a relic from a time when she could meet her own gaze in the mirror. Her hands, elegantly thin with the prominent knuckles of age, fluttered near the edge of the table, mapping the unfamiliar terrain of her water glass, her bread plate, her son's suffocating presence. Across from her sat that presence, Julian Thorne. At 44, he was a titan of the new world, a tech mogul who had built an empire on algorithms that predicted human behavior with terrifying accuracy. His company, Praxis Data, was the invisible architecture behind half the apps on every smartphone, and Forbes had recently, and with a touch of fear, dubbed him the Oracle of Silicon Alley. He wore his success like armor, a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, a Patek Philippe watch that was less a timepiece and more a statement of financial dominion and an aura of profound impatience. He had not looked at his mother, not really, since they had been seated. His attention was a captive of the sleek black rectangle of his phone, his thumb swiping through data streams that represented billions of dollars, millions of lives reduced to predictable patterns. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a commemoration of what would have been Annalise's 45th wedding anniversary. It had been Julian's idea, proposed via a sterile email from his executive assistant. He had framed it as a tribute to his late father, but his tone, the clip deficiency of the arrangements, suggested an obligation being met, a box being checked on a long list of duties. Annalise had agreed, harboring a desperate, foolish hope that this might be the night he would finally see her again. She reached for her water, her fingers brushing the condensation on the glass, the clinking of distant silverware, the murmur of conversations she couldn't place, the swift, unseen movements of the staff. It all conspired to make her feel like an island, the waters of life rushing past on all sides, eroding her a little more with each passing moment. From her station near the kitchen pass, Ilara Haddad, 24 years old, watched Table 17. She had been a server at Ethelgard for 3 years, a job she juggled with a full course load at Columbia University, where she was pursuing a master's degree in linguistics. The work was demanding, but it paid for her small apartment in Morningside Heights and the textbooks that seemed to get more expensive each semester. She had developed a sixth sense for the emotional weather of a table. She could spot a failing business deal from the way a man held his fork, an illicit affair from a shared glance, a deep-seated family sorrow from the spaces between words. Table 17 was a storm cell. The woman's isolation was a physical ache Ilara could feel from across the room. The son's dismissive posture, the way he used his phone as a shield against any possible human connection, was a language she understood all too well. She had seen men like Julian Thorne before, men who saw service staff as furniture and family as assets or liabilities. But the cold, deliberate indifference he showed his mother felt like a different category of cruelty altogether. Mr. Dubois, the maitre d', a man whose posture was as starched as his shirt, approached Ilara, his face a mask of professional neutrality. Table 17, Ilara, Mr. Thorne. He's particular, requested our most senior server. Ilara nodded, smoothing the front of her crisp apron. In her pocket, alongside her corkscrew and notepad, she carried a small, worn moleskin notebook. In it, she jotted down phrases, linguistic quirks, and observations. Her thesis was on the preservation of oral traditions in diaspora communities, a passion inherited from her Lebanese grandmother, her Sito, who could recite epic poems that had never been written down and whose descriptions of food were a form of magic, capable of summoning the scent of jasmine and the taste of sun-warmed figs from a world away. Her Sito had taught her that respect for one's elders was the bedrock of civilization. Looking at Annalise Thorne, a woman adrift in a sea of noise, Ilara felt a pang of memory. Her own Sito had begun to lose her hearing in her final years, a different kind of sensory deprivation, but one that had created a similar prison of isolation. Ilara had learned to speak to her face-to-face, to use her hands, to describe the world her grandmother could no longer fully inhabit. She took a deep breath, the scent of beeswax and roasting duck grounding her. As she walked toward Table 17, she had no idea that her graduate studies, her grandmother's lessons, and the quiet grief of a stranger were about to collide in a way that would irrevocably alter the course of her life. Sometimes, the most revolutionary act is to simply grant someone your full attention. "Good evening," Ilara said, her voice a warm, low contralto as she arrived at their table. "Welcome to Ethelgard. My name is Ilara, and it will be my pleasure to care for you this evening." Julian Thorne did not look up. Annalise, however, turned her head toward the sound of Ilara's voice, and a flicker of something, interest, maybe, crossed her face. It was the first sign of life Ilara had seen. Finally, Julian's gaze lifted from his screen. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, performed a swift, dismissive scan of Ilara, the same kind of appraisal he might give a line of code. He did not return her greeting. Instead, he gestured with a flick of his wrist toward his mother. "My mother is blind," he stated, the words devoid of emotion, a simple declaration of fact, like noting the current stock market index. "She cannot read the menu. You will need to explain it to her. Every dish, every ingredient, every preparation. And I want it done in perfect, classical Arabic. Her late husband, my father, was a diplomat in the Middle East for 20 years. It was her favorite language. She needs to be stimulated." The demand hung in the air, preposterous and cruel. It was a test, a power play designed to be impossible. Ethelgard was a French restaurant. The menu was in French and English. The likelihood of finding a server fluent in classical Arabic, let alone one capable of translating complex culinary terms on the fly, was infinitesimally small. It was a setup designed to prove a point Ilara couldn't yet decipher. Annalise's face, which had shown a glimmer of hope, now flooded with a mortified blush. "Julian, for heaven's sake, that's ridiculous. Please don't be difficult. I'm perfectly happy to have the salmon." "Mother, we are not having the salmon," he said, his voice laced with a condescending patience that was more insulting than outright anger. "We are here to have an experience. I am paying for an experience. You loved Arabic. You spoke it beautifully. Or have you forgotten that too?" The barb landed with surgical precision. Ilara saw Annalise flinch, a barely perceptible tightening of her shoulders. This wasn't about stimulating his mother. It was about punishing her for something. Ilara's mind raced. Mr. Dubois would tell her to apologize profusely and fetch a manager. Protocol dictated de-escalation. But as she looked at Annalise Thorne, she didn't see a customer. She saw a woman being systematically erased by her own son. She saw her Sito, stranded in a world she could no longer navigate alone. A quiet calm settled over her. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, sir," she said, her voice steady. Then she turned her body slightly, directing her full attention to Annalise. She switched from English to the formal, melodic cadence of classical Arabic, a language she had not only learned at her grandmother's knee, but had perfected in her studies at Columbia. "Good evening, Madame Thorne," she began in fluid, unaccented Arabic. "It would be my deepest honor to be your guide through our chef's creations tonight. We shall take all the time you need. Your son is occupied, but this moment belongs only to us." The effect was instantaneous and profound. Annalise Thorne gasped. Her head snapped toward Ilara, her unseeing eyes wide with shock. A tremor ran through her, not of anxiety, but of sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Julian, who had already turned back to his phone, assuming his request had been dismissed, froze. He slowly looked up, his mask of bored indifference shattered by confusion. He understood enough Arabic to recognize it, but not enough to grasp the elegance of Ilara's phrasing. He had expected failure, a flustered apology. He had not expected this. Julian's phone buzzed, a summons from his world of data and deals. He scowled at it, then stood abruptly. "I need to take this. It's the Tokyo Exchange opening. See that she orders something. She barely eats." He strode away toward the lobby, his voice already barking into the phone, leaving a wake of stunned silence. The moment he was gone, the tension at the table didn't just dissipate, it inverted, replaced by a fragile, trembling hope. Annalise leaned forward slightly, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions. "Who are you?" she whispered in Arabic, her accent refined, bearing the echoes of Beirut's high society from half a century ago. Ilara pulled the empty chair from the adjacent table, and, in a move that defied every rule of Ethelgard's service etiquette, sat down beside Annalise, bringing herself to the older woman's level. "My name is Ilara Haddad, madame," she replied softly in the same language. "My grandmother was from Pshari in the mountains. She believed that a meal without stories is like a body without a soul." Tears welled in Annalise's eyes, shimmering like captured starlight. "Pshari," she breathed, "the home of Gibran. My husband, Robert. He used to read Gibran to me in the evenings, in our garden in Amman." She trailed off, lost in a memory so vivid it seemed to be playing out behind her closed eyelids. "He would have loved that you sat down. He always said true hospitality ignores protocol." Ilara saw it then. The impossible request wasn't just a son's cruelty. It was a key to a locked room in Annalise's heart, a room filled with the memory of her husband, a room Julian, in his cold, calculated way, had perhaps been trying to open, or maybe just rattle the door of. "Then, madame, with your permission," Ilara said, her voice taking on the rhythmic quality of a storyteller, the cadence her cito had used when recounting ancient tales. "Let us forget the menu. Let me paint you a picture of what our chef has dreamt for us tonight. Let us give your memories a feast to attend." Annalise Thorne nodded, a single, profound gesture of assent, and as a tear finally escaped, tracing a path down her cheek, it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of recognition, of being found after being lost for a very, very long time. Ilara opened the heavy leather-bound menu, but her eyes were not on the scripted words. They were on Annalise's face, reading the subtle shifts in her expression, the slight part of her lips, the way her breathing deepened. She was listening not just with her ears, but with her whole being. We begin our journey not in France, but in a memory of the earth. Ilara started in Arabic, her tone hushed and intimate. Imagine a single, perfect scallop, plucked from the cold, deep waters off the coast of Maine this very morning. It is not assaulted by heat, but merely kissed by it, seared in clarified butter for a fleeting moment on each side. She watched as Annalise's hands, which had been trembling, grew still on the tablecloth. The searing creates a crust, thin as a whisper, the color of desert sand at dawn. But when you bite through it, the inside is still translucent, tender and sweet like a promise. It tastes not of the sea's salt, but of its soul. "I can almost feel the texture," Annalise murmured, her voice filled with wonder. Ilara smiled, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. "This jewel rests upon a bed of saffron risotto, not the garish yellow of a tourist market, but the pale, gentle gold of a fading sunset. The rice, arboreal, has been stirred with patience, each grain separate yet bound together in a creamy wave, coaxed to perfection with a broth of white wine and parmesan. And the saffron, its perfume is a ghost in the room, a hint of spice, of earth, of faraway lands. It is the scent of longing." Annalise's eyes were closed now, but she was not shutting out the world. She was seeing. In the theatre of her mind, Ilara's words were the light, the set, the actors. And to cut through this richness, the chef adds 3 single beads of pomegranate, arils scattered like rubies. When one bursts in your mouth, it is a shock of bright, clean tartness. A surprise, a reminder that even in the most perfect harmony, a single note of dissonance can create beauty. "It sounds like a poem," Annalise said, her voice thick with emotion. "Robert, my husband, he used to say that a perfect dish was a poem you could taste." "He was a wise man," Ilara said gently. Julian returned then, sliding into his chair with the disruptive energy of a boulder crashing into a tranquil pond. "Have you ordered yet? This is taking an eternity." He glanced at his watch, a device designed to measure time in a world where every second was billable. "We are not rushing, Julian," Annalise said, and the difference in her voice was astounding. The timid, apologetic tone was gone, replaced by a quiet, unshakable firmness. "We are on a journey." Julian frowned, catching the use of "we." He looked from his mother's strangely serene face to Ilara's calm one. He opened his mouth to say something dismissive, but his phone buzzed again, and he retreated back into its familiar, demanding world. Ilara continued, her voice a low, private current of Arabic flowing between her and Annalise, creating an invisible sanctuary around the two of them. "For the main course, madam, There is a dish I believe your heart will recognize. It is a rack of lamb from a small farm in Vermont, where the animals graze on wild thyme and clover." "Robert adored lamb," Annalise whispered, a wistful smile gracing her lips. "He would prepare it for our anniversary every year, with herbs from our garden." Ilara's gaze flickered to Julian. He showed no sign of having heard this mention of his father, his face illuminated by the cold blue light of his phone, his thumbs moving in a furious dance of text and email. "Our chef honors that tradition," Ilara went on, her focus returning entirely to Annalise. "The lamb is roasted with a crust of garlic, parsley, and a touch of mint. Not the aggressive mint of candy, but the gentle, green whisper of a garden after rain. It is cooked to a perfect rose pink in the center, so tender that it yields to the fork like a confession." Annalise's face was a study in rapture. The deep lines of sorrow around her mouth had softened. She looked present, engaged, alive. "It is served alongside a puree of fava beans, vibrant green, whipped with lemon and olive oil until it is as smooth as silk. A taste of springtime, and to accompany it, there are tiny, roasted potatoes, no bigger than your thumb, their skins crispy and salty, their insides fluffy like a cloud. The sauce is a reduction of the pan juices with a splash of aged port wine. It is dark, complex, and holds all the savory secrets of the dish within it." "Stop," Annalise said, holding up a hand. Ilara paused, a flicker of concern crossing her mind. Had she gone too far? But Annalise was smiling, a radiant, genuine smile that seemed to emanate from her very core. "I will have that. The lamb. I will have the journey you have described. My dear, you haven't just described a meal. You have given me back a memory I thought was lost forever." Julian looked up, his attention snagged by the conviction in his mother's voice. "Finally. I'll have the New York strip. Medium rare." But Ilara barely registered his order. She was watching as 2 tears, then 3, traced paths through the faint powder on Annalise Thorne's cheeks. They were not tears of sadness or of joy, but of something deeper, more elemental. They were tears of homecoming. As Ilara walked toward the kitchen to place the order, she felt a subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. Diners at nearby tables, who had been pretending not to notice the strange, intense drama at table 17, were now watching with open curiosity. A woman celebrating her anniversary with her husband had a hand to her heart. An older gentleman, who was a regular, a retired judge, observed the scene over his spectacles with a thoughtful expression. She paused at the kitchen pass, where Chef Antoine, a man whose fiery temper was matched only by his culinary genius, was inspecting a plate with the intensity of a jeweler examining a flawless diamond. "Chef," Ilara said quietly. "Table 17, the lamb for Mrs. Thorne." "The tech billionaire and the sad mother," Antoine grunted, without looking up. "I saw. What was all that drama?" Ilara hesitated, then decided on the truth. "He demanded I describe the menu to his blind mother in classical Arabic. As a test." Antoine's head snapped up, his pale blue eyes wide with surprise. "Arabic? And you?" "I did," Ilara said simply. "But for her, not for him. It was like giving water to someone dying of thirst. Chef, this lamb is for her anniversary. Her late husband used to make it for her. It needs to be more than just a dish. It needs to be an act of kindness." The chef's notoriously stern expression softened. He looked past Ilara, out into the dining room, his gaze resting on the solitary figure of Annalise Thorne. He nodded slowly. "I understand. An act of kindness. Leave it to me. It will be a poem just for her." When Ilara returned, it was with the bread service. Julian was on his phone again, this time with the speaker on, his voice sharp as he dissected a marketing strategy with an underling. "The click-through rate is pathetic, Henderson. Fix it or update your resume." Annalise sat in a cocoon of silence, patiently enduring the barrage of corporate jargon. The light that had ignited in her face was beginning to dim again under the relentless assault of her son's neglect. Ilara set the breadbasket down, but instead of retreating, she leaned in close to Annalise, her voice a conspiratorial whisper in Arabic. "Madame, the bread has arrived to prepare the way for the feast. May I introduce you?" Annalise's face turned toward her, a silent, grateful affirmation. "Closest to you," Ilara began, gently guiding the older woman's hand to the basket, "is a piece of our pain de campagne. Listen." She tapped the crust lightly. "It has a voice. The crust is thick and dark, caramelized from the heat of the hearth. When you break it, it will sing a crackling song. The inside is dense, chewy, with the slightly sour, honest taste of the earth." Annalise's fingers, now confident, broke off a piece. The crust crackled, just as Ilara had promised. A small, wondrous smile touched her lips. "Next to it is a brioche, golden and soft as a cloud. It is rich with butter and eggs from a farm upstate. It is not bread to be chewed, but to be melted on the tongue. It tastes of comfort, of mornings with no alarms, of pure, simple luxury." "You have a rare talent, my dear," Annalise said in a low voice, her English returning for a moment. "You don't just describe things, you reveal them. You must be a poet." Ilara's cheeks warmed. "I'm studying linguistics. My focus is on how language shapes our perception of reality." "How fitting," Annalise said, her voice dropping even lower. "After I lost my sight, my reality became so small. A world of textures and sounds, but without color, without context. My husband, Robert, he was my context. He described everything. The color of the sky, the expression on a friend's face, the composition of a painting. When he died," her voice broke. The world went silent and dark at the same time. Julian's voice sliced through their private conversation like a shard of glass. "Mother, must you be so dramatic with the staff? I'm on a call with my board of directors." The words were a public rebuke, designed to humiliate and silence. Annalise flinched as if struck. The fragile connection shattered. The light in her face went out completely, replaced by a mask of pained resignation. A hot white anger surged through Ilara. It was so potent it made her hands tremble. She wanted to tell him that his board of directors was less important than his mother's heart. She wanted to tell him that he was a hollow man, a ghost haunting his own life, mistaking the rattle of his gold for the beat of a heart. But she bit her tongue, her training kicking in. "My apologies, sir," she said, her voice perfectly level, professionally blank. "I will bring your appetizers shortly." As she turned away, she heard Annalise's whisper, thin and reedy. "I'm sorry, Julian. I didn't mean to disturb you. Just try to remember where you are, Mother." The appetizers arrived. A wedge salad for Julian, a utilitarian choice he'd made without a second thought. For Annalise, the seared scallop on saffron risotto. Ilara placed Julian's salad before him with cool efficiency. He was already typing on his phone with one hand, forking lettuce into his mouth with the other. But for Annalise, Ilara knelt. She brought herself down to eye level, reclaiming the intimate space they had created. Speaking in a low, melodic Arabic that was only for Annalise, she became her eyes. "The plate is before you, madame. Imagine it is a clock face. At the center, that is the risotto, a golden island. The scallop rests atop it at 12 o'clock. The ruby pomegranate seeds are scattered at 3, 6, and 9 o'clock, like tiny markers of time. Annalise's hand found Ilara's arm, squeezing it for a brief, thankful moment. "Thank you," she whispered. She picked up her fork, and with newfound confidence, guided by the map Ilara had drawn, she took her first bite. She closed her eyes. A slow, beatific smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated pleasure. For that one moment, she was not a blind woman, not a grieving widow, not a burden to her son. She was a woman tasting a poem. And across the room, people were watching. They weren't just watching a waitress serve a meal. They were witnessing an act of profound, defiant tenderness. The main courses were ready. The New York strip for Julian, perfectly cooked, a testament to the kitchen's skill that would go entirely unappreciated. And the lamb for Annalise. Chef Antoine had outdone himself. He had arranged the 2 small chops in an elegant curve, the bones Frenched and clean, the herb crust a vibrant green against the blushing pink of the meat. The fava bean puree was a perfect, smooth swoosh of color, and the tiny potatoes were scattered like precious stones. He had even added a single, blooming chive blossom as a final flourish. It was not just a plate of food, it was a declaration. Ilara served Julian first, a perfunctory act he barely acknowledged. Then she approached Annalise, the magnificent plate held before her like an offering. She knelt once more. "Madame Thorne," she said softly in Arabic, "your lamb has arrived. Chef Antoine asked me to tell you that he cooked this not with his hands, but with his heart. He hopes it reminds you of your husband's garden." Annalise's breath hitched. A hand flew to her lips. The idea that a stranger in a kitchen she would never see cared enough to send such a message was overwhelming. As Ilara began to describe the placement of each element, the vibrant colors, the imagined scents, she felt a shift in the energy behind her. Julian had finished his call. He was watching them. His face was a thundercloud of irritation. "Is this performance really necessary?" he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut. "For God's sake, just let her eat the damn food." Annalise froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. The joy on her face curdled into shame. Ilara rose slowly, her professional composure a thin veneer over a core of simmering rage. "Sir, I am simply ensuring your mother can enjoy the meal you so generously ordered for her. I ordered a meal, not a 3-act play," he sneered. "You've been kneeling at our table all night like some sort of paid mourner. It's making a scene. People are staring." The restaurant, which had been murmuring along, grew perceptibly quieter. The judge at the corner table set down his wine glass. The anniversary couple stopped talking entirely. "Julian, please," Annalise whispered, her voice trembling. "She has been a godsend." "Don't defend her, Mother. I'm handling this." He turned his full, venomous attention on Ilara. "I am paying an obscene amount of money for this dinner. I expect professional service, not some New Age therapy session. Do your job and then leave us alone." Ilara looked at Annalise's face. It was a mask of utter devastation. The brief, beautiful light Ilara had managed to coax out of her had been brutally extinguished. She looked smaller, older, and more alone than she had when the evening began. And in that moment, something inside Ilara broke. It was the culmination of years of swallowing insults, of smiling through condescension, of being treated as invisible. It was the memory of her Sito's fierce pride, her insistence on dignity above all else. It was the righteous anger of a student of language watching a beautiful tongue being used as a weapon of casual cruelty. She drew herself up to her full height. Her hands, surprisingly, were steady. She met Julian Thorne's cold, imperious gaze without flinching. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet but carrying with absolute clarity in the sudden silence of the room. My job, as you call it, is to provide service. But my duty, as a human being, is to offer dignity, a concept with which you seem unfamiliar. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. Julian's face darkened, flushing a dangerous shade of red. Excuse me? Who in the hell do you think you are? I am the person who listened to your mother, Ilara continued, her voice gaining strength. I am the person who saw a woman drowning in loneliness while her son scrolled through his bank account. You demanded I speak to her in Arabic, a language you clearly do not understand, or you would know that it is a language of poetry, of hospitality, of profound respect for one's family. You used it as a tool to humiliate her, to make an impossible demand of a stranger. I used it to build a bridge back to a time when she was loved, when she was seen, when she was cherished. The string quartet, which had been softly playing Vivaldi, faltered and fell silent. Every diner, every server, every busboy was frozen, watching the drama unfold. Julian shot to his feet, his chair screeching back against the polished floor. You are fired! Do you hear me? I will speak to your manager. I will speak to the owner. I will buy this pathetic restaurant and turn it into a parking garage just to have the pleasure of firing you myself. Annalise was crying openly now, her hands covering her face. Julian, stop it. Please, just stop. But Ilara wasn't finished. The truth, once unleashed, had a momentum all its own. You can't buy this restaurant, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice ringing with a conviction that startled even herself. Because you don't understand what it is. You think it's a place to spend money, but it's a place that creates memories. And you can't buy decency. You can't buy empathy. And you certainly cannot buy the love and respect of a mother you treat like a tax write-off. You sit here in your $1,000 suit, a king of a digital empire, but you are the poorest man in this room, because your heart is bankrupt. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a profound, echoing void. Not a fork clinked. Not a breath was drawn. The entire world of Ethelgard seemed to be holding its collective breath. Julian Thorne stood there, his mouth slightly agape, utterly disarmed. His usual weapons, money, power, intimidation, were useless against this. He had been stripped bare in a room full of strangers, his cruelty laid out for all to see. Then a new voice cut through the stillness. That will be quite enough. Everyone turned. Standing by the grand archway to the main dining hall was Beatrice Vance, the owner of Ethelgard. A legend in the New York culinary world, she was a woman in her late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes that had seen everything. She walked toward table 17, not with anger, but with a slow, deliberate purpose. Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice calm but resonant with authority. I have been observing your table since you arrived. I saw you ignore your mother. I heard you berate my staff. And I witnessed this young woman, Ilara, perform one of the most profound acts of service I have ever seen in my 40 years in this business. She stopped beside Ilara, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. She did not offer you therapy, sir. She offered your mother grace, something you seem to have forgotten how to do. Beatrice Vance then looked out at the rest of the dining room. The meal for everyone in this room tonight is on the house, she announced, as an apology for having your evening disturbed, and as a celebration of an employee who understands that the soul of hospitality is not servitude, but humanity. And then the impossible happened. The retired judge in the corner began to clap, not loudly, but with a slow, steady rhythm. The anniversary couple joined in. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. It wasn't for the free meal. It was for Ilara. It was for Annalise. It was for the simple, beautiful, and radical idea that decency was worth more than dollars. Julian Thorne stood frozen amidst the ovation, his face a mask of disbelief and utter humiliation. Annalise, her face streaked with tears, lowered her hands and, guided by the sound, turned her face toward Ilara, a look of fierce, heartbreaking pride in her unseeing eyes. And Ilara stood there, trembling, the applause washing over her, knowing she had almost certainly lost her job, but in the process had found something infinitely more valuable: her own voice. The applause subsided, leaving a tense, expectant quiet in its wake. Julian Thorne remained standing, a statue of impotent fury. He looked around the room, at the faces of strangers who had just witnessed his public vivisection, and for the first time, the impenetrable armor of his confidence showed a crack. He was a man who controlled outcomes, who manipulated markets and men with equal ease. This raw, unscripted human moment had left him utterly adrift. This is an outrage," he stammered, his voice lacking its earlier fire. He was grasping for a script, a protocol for a situation his vast intellect had never modeled. "Julian." Annalise's voice, though quiet, sliced through his blustering. She had risen from her chair, her hand gripping the table for support. She was no longer crying. Her face, though tear-stained, was imbued with a strength Ilara had not seen before. "Sit down," she commanded. He stared at her, dumbfounded. It had been years, perhaps decades, since his mother had used that tone with him. It was the voice of his childhood, the voice that tolerated no argument. "Mother, I am defending your honor. This waitress." "She did not insult my honor, Julian. She restored it," Annalise said, her voice ringing with clarity. "For 5 years, since your father died and my world went dark, I have felt like a piece of antique furniture you dust off for holidays, an obligation, a problem to be managed with your money. Tonight, this young woman looked past my blindness, past my age, and saw me, the person I used to be, the person I still am. She gave me a gift your billions could never buy. She gave me back my husband for a few moments." The last sentence was a gut punch. Julian visibly recoiled, his face paling. The mention of his father was a key to a room he kept, double-bolted. "What are you talking about?" he whispered. "The Arabic," Annalise explained, her voice softening slightly. "The way she spoke it, the poetry of her descriptions. It was your father's language, the language of our life together. You demanded it as a cruel parlor trick. She understood it was a prayer. She made me remember what it felt like to be loved not for my utility, but for my soul. And you were angry at her for it. You were angry at my tears because you no longer recognized the difference between sorrow and grace." The dining room was a courtroom, and every person in it was a juror, witnessing a verdict that had been years in the making. Beatrice Vance stood by, her arms crossed, allowing the scene to play out. This was no longer about restaurant policy, it was about a family's reckoning. Julian sank back into his chair, not with the fluid grace of before, but with the heavy, clumsy motion of a man whose bones had turned to lead. He stared at the untouched plate of lamb before his mother, then at his mother's face, and it seemed as if he were truly seeing her for the first time all night. He saw not just a blind, elderly woman, but the woman who had taught him to read, the woman who had held him when his first dog died, the woman whose laughter used to fill their home. He looked at Ilara, who had remained standing, her heart still pounding in her chest. He saw not a subordinate, not a functionary, but a young woman with more courage and insight than his entire board of directors combined. His phone buzzed on the table, a frantic, insistent vibration. It was a reflex honed over 20 years of relentless ambition. His hand started to move toward it. "Don't," Annalise said, her voice gentle but firm. "Not this time, son. Please, be here, with me." His hand froze inches from the phone. The buzzing continued, an alien sound in the profound stillness. It buzzed 3, 4, 5 times, then fell silent. The silence it left behind was more significant than any noise. Slowly, hesitantly, Julian reached across the table. Not for his phone, but for his mother's hand. Annalise's fingers found his, her grip surprisingly strong. Ilara quietly stepped back, melting into the shadows by the service station. She felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her, the adrenaline from the confrontation leaving a hollow ache in its place. She had said things she never thought she would dare to say. She had gambled her entire livelihood on a single, impulsive act of defiance. She caught the eye of Mr. Dubois, who was standing near the entrance, looking utterly shell-shocked. He gave her a look that was a mixture of terror and profound respect. As she made her way toward the sanctuary of the kitchen, several diners reached out to touch her arm as she passed. "Thank you," whispered the woman from the anniversary table. The retired judge simply nodded at her, a gesture of solemn approval that meant more than any words. In the kitchen, Chef Antoine was waiting, leaning against a stainless steel counter. The usual chaotic symphony of the kitchen was muted. The staff had all heard the applause, the subsequent silence. "So," Antoine said, his arms crossed, "you started a revolution in my dining room." Ilara leaned against the cool metal wall, letting out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. "I think I just got myself fired in the most spectacular way possible." "Fired?" Antoine let out a short, barking laugh. "My dear girl, you just became the most famous waitress in New York City. Now the question is, what are you going to do about it?" Ilara spent the next 10 minutes in the relative calm of the kitchen, sipping a glass of water a busboy silently handed her. Her mind was a whirlwind. She replayed the scene over and over, the anger in Julian's eyes, the tears on Annalise's face, the shocking sound of applause. Finally, Mr. Dubois appeared at the kitchen door, his composure somewhat restored. "Ilara, Table 17 is asking for the check, and they are asking for you to bring it." Her stomach clenched. This was it. The final, formal dismissal. She took a deep breath, pasted on her professional face, and walked back out into the dining room. The atmosphere had changed completely. The tension had eased, replaced by a quiet, contemplative mood. The quartet was playing again, a soft, melancholy piece by Satie. At Table 17, Julian and Annalise were talking. Their hands were still clasped on the table. Julian's phone was nowhere in sight. He had put it away in his coat pocket. He was leaning forward, listening intently as his mother spoke, her face animated. Ilara approached cautiously. "You asked for the check, Mr. Thorne?" Julian looked up. The anger and arrogance were gone, replaced by a deep, weary shame. "Yes. And we owe you an apology." The word sounded foreign in his mouth, as if he were speaking a language he had only just learned. "You have nothing to apologize for," Annalise interjected, turning her face toward Ilara's voice. "You have given me a gift beyond measure." "I do," Julian insisted, his gaze fixed on Ilara. "What you said was true, all of it. I've been hiding in my work ever since my father died. It was easier to build an empire than to sit with my own grief, or my mother's." He looked at their joined hands, I've been treating her like a problem to be solved, not a person to be loved. You saw that in one evening. It's taken me 5 years to even begin to admit it." Ilara was speechless. The raw honesty was disarming. "My lamb is cold," Annalise said, a hint of playful mischief in her voice, breaking the intensity of the moment. "But I would love to have one more bite. Julian, would you do me the honor of describing it to me?" A look of panic crossed Julian's face. "Mother, I can't. I don't know how. I don't have the words." "Try," she urged. "Just tell me what you see." He hesitated, then picked up his own fork, cut a small piece of the lamb from his mother's plate, and tasted it. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Ilara watched, fascinated, as the titan of industry struggled to find a vocabulary for something other than finance and data. "It's warm," he began, faltering, "and it tastes like home." His voice cracked on the last word. He cleared his throat. "There are herbs, rosemary, like the bushes Dad planted by the back door of the house in Connecticut. Do you remember? The whole kitchen would smell like this on Sundays." Tears were streaming down Annalise's face again, but this time she was smiling radiantly. "Yes, my love, just like that. I remember. And the meat is tender," he continued, gaining a little confidence. "It's pink, and there's a sauce. It's dark and sweet. It tastes like a special occasion." He looked at his mother, a profound understanding dawning in his eyes. "It tastes like an anniversary." He spent the next 15 minutes guiding his mother through the rest of her meal, his descriptions clumsy and simple compared to Ilara's poetic recitations. But they were infused with something far more powerful: shared memory. He was no longer just describing food. He was rebuilding a bridge to his own past, to his mother, one hesitant word at a time. When Ilara brought the check, Beatrice Vance had already comped the entire bill, as promised. But Julian took the leather folder, opened it, and placed a personal check inside. It was made out to Ilara Haddad. The amount was for $25,000. In the memo line he had written, "For the education." "I can't accept this," Ilara whispered, shocked. "Please," he said, his voice low and earnest. "It's not a tip, it's an investment, in someone who understands the value of things money can't buy. Consider it tuition. My mother and I have a lot to learn, and you were our first lesson." Before they left, Annalise took both of Ilara's hands in her own. "Ilara Haddad," she said, her voice full of warmth. "I have a feeling our journey together has only just begun." Julian placed a gentle hand on his mother's back, guiding her toward the exit. He walked slowly, matching her pace, his arm offered for her to take. It was a simple gesture, but it was a universe away from the man who had walked in 3 hours earlier. The next morning, Ilara's world exploded. A diner had discreetly filmed the entire confrontation on their phone. The video, titled "Waitress Schools Billionaire on Decency," had been uploaded to Twitter. By the time Ilara woke up, it had 4 million views. It was the #1 trending topic in the United States. Her name, her face, her words were everywhere. News trucks were parked outside Ethelgard. Her university email inbox had crashed. Beatrice Vance called her at 9 a.m. "I hope you're ready for your life to change," she said, not unkindly. "You're not just a waitress anymore, Ilara. You're a symbol." The weeks that followed were a blur. She was on Good Morning America. The New York Times ran a feature on her in the Sunday magazine. Her linguistics professor asked her to guest lecture on the socio-cultural power of language. But the most important call came from a number she didn't recognize. "Ilara, it's Julian Thorne." His voice was different over the phone, quieter, more thoughtful. My mother and I have been talking. A lot. We've decided to start a foundation. The Annalise and Robert Thorne Legacy Project. Its mission will be to fund programs that use oral history, storytelling, and cultural traditions to connect with and support seniors, especially those with sensory loss. We want to fund people who build bridges, the way you did for us. He paused. We need a director of programming, someone to find the projects, to guide the vision. Someone who understands that a person's memory is their most valuable asset. The job is yours if you want it. You can finish your PhD. We'll fund that too. We want you to teach us how to listen. 3 months later, Ilara stood in a community center in Queens, listening as a young woman described the intricate patterns of a traditional Persian rug to her blind grandfather in Farsi. It was the first project funded by the Thorne Legacy Project. Across the room, Annalise Thorne sat listening, a serene smile on her face. Beside her, Julian sat not looking at a phone, but at the people in the room, his expression one of rapt attention. Ilara still worked 2 shifts a week at Ethelgard. Beatrice Vance had insisted. "It will keep you grounded," she'd said. And besides, all our new customers want to be served by the famous waitress of decency. That evening, as she described the coq au vin to an elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, she thought about the strange, unpredictable currents of life. She had walked into work one night expecting to serve overpriced food to wealthy people. She had walked out having started a revolution, dismantled a man's emotional fortress, and rediscovered a woman's soul. And in the process, she had found that her own small, quiet studies in linguistics were not just academic. They were a form of magic, capable of turning words into light in the darkest of places.